In this video, I'm going to teach you how to build this personal finance dashboard from scratch, including the essential steps you must take so you can update the dashboard with the click of a single button. Now, if you're not interested in reporting on your personal finances, you'll find there are a load of Excel tricks and techniques in this dashboard that you can apply to any data. For example, waterfall charts, trend lines, automatic updates, and more. So be sure to stick around. The Excel file is available to download from the link in the video description, so you can use this file for your own reporting. And if I go too fast for you, you can click the cog icon in the bottom right of the video and change the playback speed. All right, let's get started. The first sheet in the file will contain my dashboard. This is just a regular sheet, and I've simply adjusted the row heights in a few places to save me some time later. But otherwise, there's nothing fancy about this sheet. You don't need an add-in or anything like that. So let me name this dashboard. Then on the transactions sheet, I've got my bank transaction data. Now you might import this from your bank statement or enter it manually. Obviously, there are a lot of different banking systems, so the process will differ from one to the next, and I can't cover them all. But most will have an export to Excel or CSV or text file button, enabling you to download the transactions and bring them into Excel. Now your bank should export the first 5 columns of data containing the account it came from, the transaction date, the description, and the debit or credit amounts. I then added a formula for the amount, and this simply takes the credits minus the debits to get a single column of values that stores expenses as negative values and income as positive values. And this column is simply required for the waterfall chart. I've then added subcategories for each transaction via a data validation list. If you're not familiar with how to insert a data validation list, then you can click the link at the top of the video to see a tutorial. The data validation list is stored on the data validation tab. You can see it in this table here. It's also got columns for the category and category type. Now you can modify this table to suit your own needs, adding and removing rows as required. The next thing I need to do is populate the category and category type fields. And I'm going to use a lookup formula for this. I'm using XLOOKUP, but if you have an earlier version of Excel, say 2019 or earlier, then you can use VLOOKUP or index and match. So what I want to do is look up the subcategory on the data validation list in the subcategory column and return the category. Close my parentheses, and there's my category completed. Now it's copied down the entire table because my data is stored in a table, and I'll mention more on that in a moment. First, let's do the category type. I'm going to Control R to copy the formula across, and then all I need to do is replace the category with the category type. And that's done. Now these fields enable me to group the transactions and understand where my money's going. I've currently got data from January through to October in this table. And at the end of the video, I'm going to show you how you can update the dashboard with November's data with one click, so be sure to watch to the end. Now, to enable updating with one click, it's essential that you format your data in an Excel table using the keyboard shortcut Ctrl-T. My data's already in a table, and you can see here it's called Transactions. All right, I'm ready to start analyzing and summarizing the data for my dashboard. Let's just take a quick look at it so we can familiarize ourselves with what we need to build. The first values I need are for the headline figures at the top of the dashboard. Now, one thing I want to point out before we get started is that I've set this page to use a specific color palette, in this case the paper color palette. And this alters the default colors to those that you see here. And that's why you'll notice they appear different to the defaults you might be familiar with. You can even create your own custom color theme, and that will save you time when you're formatting your reports. So let's go back into the file I'm working in. You can see I've also selected the same color palette. In this file here, it's set to paper. You get a little preview as you hover over the different color palettes. You can play around with that in your own time. Now I'm going to be using pivot tables for my analysis because they're super fast to build, and when they're linked to data in an Excel table, like I have here, they automatically include any new data upon refresh. So let's go ahead and insert a pivot table on a new worksheet. I'll start by giving this pivot table a name. We'll call it PT Headline, and this will help me identify it later when I connect the slices. I'll drag the pivot table field list over closer to the pivot table so you can see it in context. So here I want the category and I want the debit amounts. Now I don't want the salary. This is just looking at expenses, so let's filter that out. I'm going to sort values in descending order, so largest to smallest. Let's go ahead and format the numbers. I want them set to a currency data type with no decimal places. This is going to feed through to my report. Now let's rename this sheet Analysis. Now I'm going to put all my pivot tables on this sheet, but when you create your own dashboards, I recommend you put each pivot table on its own sheet so that there's no risk of them overlapping one another, because this will break your dashboard. So we're ready to go to the dashboard sheet and bring in those numbers. First of all, I need some formatting. Now you can do this with cell fill colors, but I want rounded corners on my background. So I'm going to use a shape. So insert shapes, and it's this rounded rectangle here. And let's just roughly draw it in. I know the size that I want. So on the Format tab, I'm going to type in the size 1.93 by 40.72. Okay, let's go ahead and format the shape. So I'm going to Control 1 with the shape selected. That opens the formatting pane. We can drag it out and move it to somewhere more convenient. So in my fill, I want a gradient fill. And down here, I want an extra stop, and we'll move it to the end. And this one here, let's just make this a bit bigger. Put that in the middle, it's pretty much there anyway. So I want to start with the dark purple, which it is, then move through to this color and end again with the dark purple. Now, it's not going in the direction I want. I actually want it to go horizontally, so I want this, and that's pretty good. Okay, let's give it some text. Let's change the size of that font to 30 point. Now I need some icons for the different expense types to make the numbers quicker to interpret. So on the Insert tab, we've got icons. These are available in Excel 2019 onward, so you may not have them in your version. I want a house and shopping. This will be for my discretionary expenditure. And I want car for my transport expenses, and dining for my restaurant expenses. And I want one for charity, and lastly one for my medical expenses. So let's go with this one here. You can see in the bottom corner I've got 6 selected, so let's insert those. With them all selected, I'm going to change the size to 1.2, and I'm going to change the color to this pale purple. It'll stand out better on the background. So let's just roughly align them. So I want one there, charity, and then we have medical, transport, discretionary. I'm not too worried about their position, because what I'm going to do is on the Home tab, we're going to go into Find and select objects. And then I'm just going to lasso them. With them all selected, I can now use the alignment tools. So I'm going to align them to the top and then distribute them horizontally, just spaces them evenly. And then with my arrow keys, I'm just going to nudge them up towards the top because I need space below the icons for my text. All right, the next thing to do is to link some text boxes with the values in my pivot table. So we need to insert a text box, and we'll just do the living expenses first. So with the text box selected, in the formula bar, I'm going to equals, go to my analysis sheet. Now, if I select the pivot table, I get the get pivot data function. Now a text box cannot be linked to a formula. So I need to link it to the cell beside and then just change that to column B. That just gets around the get pivot data formula and links it to the correct cell in the pivot table. So press enter, there's my value linked to the pivot table. Let's center that vertically, and we'll go ahead and get rid of the fill color and the outline on that shape. And then we can format the font in the same light purple. Change the font size to 14. Actually, we might make it 16. There we go. All right, so that's that one done. The next thing I need is a text box for the labels. So let's do that. Another text box underneath. This is my living expenses. And again, we want to format the text box with no fill and no outline. On the Home tab, we'll format the font in the lilac color, and we'll make it bigger, which means my text box needs to be bigger as well. Okay, So there's the first two text boxes done. Holding down Shift to select them both, and then holding Control and Shift, I can left click and drag to duplicate them. And I'm just going to do it for each of the categories. And then we'll edit them. So this one is going to pick up cell B5, and you'll notice the formatting gets lost when I make that change, but I'll show you a shortcut on how to put that formatting back in a moment. 7, this is 8, and 9. So now with the formatting gone, I'm just going to select the one that's still formatted correctly, double click the format painter, and now I can just simply tap it onto those text boxes that need formatting. Press Escape to clear the format painter. Now I can just modify these. Discretionary, this one is transport, this one is dining out, this one is charity, and this one is medical. Okay, I won't spend too much time on formatting, but let's just tidy those up a little bit. All right, using my lasso tool again, let's select these ones, and it hasn't picked up those two, that's fine. You have to lasso the entire text box for it to work. So we'll move them over. Okay, that's good. Now we just need one more text box to say spend year to date, and we'll resize that and align it right. Okay, let's take another look at the dashboard to see what's next. So I need a pivot table for the Doughnut chart. Let's tackle that one. We'll go back into the file and we're going to insert a new pivot table onto the analysis sheet. I'm just going to pop it below this one here. So I need account and the debit amounts. Let's format the numbers. Currency with no decimal places. Let's give the pivot table a name, PT Doughnut, and we're ready to insert the pivot chart. So under Pie you'll find Doughnuts. I'm going to right click and hide all the fill buttons, I don't want those. And I'm going to move the legend to the bottom. I'm going to add labels, but I want to go into more options. And here I want percentage and no leader line. And I wanted to wrap down onto a new line. Now let's make the donut hole smaller. So instead of 75, we'll make it 50%. And let's change the colors. I prefer this color scheme. We'll give it a new title, Total Spend by Account. Now let's cut, Control X to cut, and paste it into the dashboard. So I need to resize it, and we'll take it out to column J. Let's close the pivot chart field list so we've got more room to work. So what I want to do with this is also give it a fill color for the background. So again, gradient fill. This time I only want 2 gradient stops, so let's remove one and we'll move that to the top. Instead of the direction it's currently going in, I want it to go vertically. And now I need to recolor the text so that it's readable. Unfortunately, I have to select them one by one and apply it. All right, let's just nudge this up here, and we're going to send it to the back so it sits underneath the header. I want to change the chart borders, so let's scroll down and expose the border options, and at the very bottom I want rounded corners, and that's just going to be in keeping with the rest of my rounded corners. It looks like this has a border on it, so let's get rid of the outline on that one. That looks better. Probably nudge it up a little bit more. Okay, so we'll move this down slightly and we'll make the donut hole, or the donut, bigger. Now, one more thing I need is the total spend. So let's insert a text box. It's going to sit in the middle of my donut. I'm going to link it using the formula to the grand total here. Remember, I can't select the cell of the pivot table, so I'm going to select the one beside and type in B. Let's change this to have no outline and no fill. We'll go back here and we'll make the font white, center it, and make it a bit bigger. Okay, so there's my donut chart done. We'll go back and check what the next chart is. So this one is for all expenses and net income. This is actually 2 charts formatted to look like one. So what we need is 2 separate pivot tables. Let's go back and insert those. On the transactions, I want to insert a pivot table on my analysis sheet. I'm going to pop it in there. So this pivot table is going to look at the category type in the filter. We want the date. Now notice the dates are grouped. We can tell they're grouped because they've got the plus beside the month name. If I right click and group, I can remove the grouping on days and just leave it grouped as months. And then I want the sum of the debit amount. Let's give this pivot table a name. So it's my pivot table for my expenses column chart. Let's format the numbers so they feed through to the chart the way we want. No decimal places. And I'm ready to insert a clustered column chart. That's the first one by default anyway, so let's pop that in. Don't need my field list anymore, so let's bring it up here. I'm going to right click and hide all the fill buttons. And then here, I don't want the legend, there's only one series. I don't want the grid lines because I'm going to add data labels. Now notice the vertical axis starts at 2800. It should always start at 0 in a column chart. So let's go and fix that. In the axis options, we're going to make the minimum 0 and the maximum 3200. Now I've done that. I don't need to see the vertical axis because I've got my data labels. Let's make these columns a bit wider. So we'll fix the gap width to 50%. And we'll just move the chart title to the left. I'm going to leave it as is. You'll see later on I'm going to create some dynamic chart titles. The last thing I need to do is I want to get rid of the shape fill and the shape outline because these charts overlap one another. So let's cut it out and paste it in here. And we can make it fill the space. And we'll just bring it down to about row 14. Okay, that's better. Now let's get rid of the grid lines on the dashboard. And it'll look more like a dashboard. Okay, that one's done. Let's rinse and repeat for the net income chart. So for that, I'm just going to copy this pivot table. And let's bring the field list back, right click, show field list. And here, I don't want the debit, sum of debit. Instead, I want the amount. And I don't need the category type anymore. Let's change the grand total to net. And we'll do the formatting with comma separator and no decimal places. And we'll give the pivot table a name, PT net column chart. Let's insert the column chart. Get rid of the field list. Okay, so again, right click, hide all the fill buttons. We don't need the legend or the grid lines because we're going to have data labels. We need to fix the vertical axis so that it matches that of the expenses column chart. That will just make them more easily comparable. So for that we want a maximum of 3200 and that changes the minimum, so let's change that to 0. Alright, now we've done that, we don't actually need the vertical axis, so let's turn that off. We'll make the gap width 50% like we did with the other chart. Let's change the fill color to this pink and let's also add a trend line. And I'll just select that and make it pink as well so it's consistent. Alright, this is our net income and we'll get rid of the shape fill and outline and we'll Control X to cut it out and pop it on the dashboard. So we'll make it the same width and then I can bring it up so that it sits closer. Bring that down so it's not overlapping, and in fact I'll make the font smaller in that. I'll make the font smaller there so they're consistent. So there's our two charts. Now to make them look as though they're one, we're just going to surround them in a rounded corner rectangle. I'll just draw it on and then we'll change the radius. Let's get rid of the shape fill and we'll give it this pale purple color. Let's take a look at the dashboard. The next chart is this one down here, the line chart by expense category. So let's go ahead and build the pivot table for that. I'm actually going to copy this one and paste it here. So I'll bring back the field list and we'll just put it on the left side. So on the category type, the date, sum of debit, but I want to see it by category going across the columns. We'll get rid of the grand total, right click, remove grand total. Now I want to sort it in descending order based on the amount. So in category, more sort options, I want to see it in descending order based on the debit amount. So now we have living expenses down to salary. In fact, I want to make sure I'm only looking at expenses, so let's filter it. I don't need the grand total either, so let's remove that. All right, we're ready to insert the line chart. Let's do it from here. You can do it from the pivot table menu or from the insert tab. I'll right click and remove all the fill buttons or hide them. Let's pop the legend at the top. It's going to act like my chart title. We'll just make the chart wider so that it's on one line. Okay, now we can't see the medical expenses, so I'm just going to select charity and then hold down Control and up arrow, and you can see now I've selected a series we can't actually see. So let's Control 1 to open the formatting. We'll go into here and we'll add a marker, one of the built-in markers, just the dot. The reason we don't see the medical expenses is because they're not in every month, so there's no line for them. But with the dot we can see when they occur. All right, let's select the chart, Control X to cut. We'll go into the dashboard and paste it in. Let's get rid of that field list because we don't need that anymore. And we'll resize it. Now this chart, we can actually set the chart border to have rounder corners. So in the formatting, down the bottom we've got rounder corners. Let's just change the color so it's consistent with the others. And that one's done. Okay, let's go back to the dashboard and see what's next. So the next chart is the tree map. And Treemap's suitable for displaying hierarchical data. Let's go ahead and build that. So I'm going to insert a pivot table on the analysis sheet, and we'll just pop it beside. Now let me just check. I didn't rename this pivot table, so let's do that first. This is PT line chart. Okay, and while we're naming, let's name this PT Treemap. So this pivot table is going to have the category type, the category, subcategory, and the debit amount. Now I only want to see expenses, and I don't want this layout. I don't need the subtotals, so right click and turn them off. And then on the design tab, we're going to change the layout to tabular. I also don't want the grand total, so right click and remove that. So there's the data that I need for my tree map. Now if we try and insert a pivot chart, you'll see that we can't create this chart type with the data inside a pivot table. So we have to trick Excel into creating a Treemap chart and referencing the pivot table. So I'm going to copy the data and then just Alt-ESV to paste as values. Now that we have the data in the format we want, that is not in a pivot table, we can insert the tree map. Let's make it a bit bigger. Now all I need to do is right click the tree map, select data, and edit the cell references. So instead of referencing that sum of debit, I want it to reference that cell. And this one here, instead of those numbers, I want it to reference the pivot table. And we'll do the same for this one. So instead of those labels, we want these ones. And now you can see my tree map chart is referencing the pivot table. I don't need this data anymore. Let's delete that. So let's go ahead and do some formatting here. I don't want the legend and the data labels. I want to add the value. So that's my tree map done. I'm going to leave the chart title for now because like some of the other charts, this one's also going to have a dynamic chart label, which we'll do later. So Control X and Control V to paste it in. Let's make it a bit bigger. And we also want to hide or turn off the outline. Now these tree map charts do not have the option to give the border rounded corners. So let's hide the outline, no outline, and then we'll insert, actually what I'll do is copy this shape, holding down Control and Shift, left click and drag to copy it across, and then I'll just resize it to surround the tree map. So there's the tree map done. Let's go back to the dashboard and see what's next. So last chart is the waterfall chart, and this illustrates how you get from the starting point of your income to the amount you have left at the end of the period. So let's go and insert a pivot table. So insert pivot table on the analysis sheet, and we'll just pop it underneath the tree map. Okay, so this pivot table is going to have the date in the filters, the category down the rows, and the amount. Let's give this pivot table a name, PT Waterfall, and we'll format the numbers with no decimal places and the comma separator. Now, ideally, I'd have this sorted starting with salary and then the biggest expense going down. But if I sort these amounts in descending order, from largest to smallest, you see it starts with the smallest negative value, and actually what I want is living expenses up here. If I try and manually rearrange that, it won't let me. So let's undo that. I'm just going to manually sort this so that salary's at the top. You can go ahead and manually sort the others if you want. I'm going to leave them at that for now. Now, just like the tree map, the waterfall chart does not have an equivalent of a pivot chart, and we can see that if we go in here, we get the same message. So just like the tree map, we're going to copy the data and paste it as values, and then we can insert a regular waterfall chart and then go about modifying it. Right click, select the data, and we'll edit where it's referencing. So instead of there, we're going to reference the pivot table. And then likewise for the labels. Okay, and okay. Let's change this to net instead of grand total. Let's make this chart bigger so we can see it more clearly. All right, now because we have labels, we don't need the grid lines and we don't need our vertical axis. We already know what the amounts are. Now with a waterfall chart, you need to tell Excel which column is a total amount. And that in this case is this net column here. So selecting it once and then once again with the left click selects just that column. Right click, set as total. So we can see now that we came from 40,000 in salary and we've had all these expenses that leave us with a net of 9355. Now I want to change the color style of this table. So on the design tab, we're going to change it to this fourth one here. All right, let's Control X to cut and paste it in the dashboard. Now, just like the tree map, we do not have the luxury of being able to round the corners of this chart. So I'm going to hide the chart border. I'll just resize it first. And then on the formatting tab, we're going to get rid of the outline. And then I'll just copy the shape from above down and resize that for this chart. One more thing I want to do actually is put the legend at the bottom. Now this one is also going to have a dynamic chart label, so I'm going to leave the chart title for now. Okay, we've created all the charts. The last visual we've got left, let's just take a look at the completed dashboard, is this table at the bottom with our top 5 categories. So let's go ahead and build the pivot table required for them. On the analysis sheet, I'm going to go to the start and just copy the very first pivot table we built for the headline figures. So in here, I don't want the grand total. Let's remove that. Right click, remove grand total. And then we can filter this for our top, well, I want top 5. So let's go into top 10 and we'll change that to 5. Top 5 items based on the sum of debit amount. So there's our top 5. Let's select those cells and Control C to copy. And then in the dashboard, in cell J30, I'm going to paste links. Now these cells here, I actually want to move them across. Let's format them, Control 1 to format them with currency formatting and no decimal places. Now I actually need these numbers again, so I'm just going to reference them and Control Enter. I'm not too concerned about the formatting here, that's fine, because what I actually want these for is to apply some conditional formatting data bars. Doesn't matter what color, so I'll select blue, and then let's go in and manage rules. Double click on the rule here to edit it. Here I only want to see the bar in this column because I've already got the numbers here. Let's change the color to purple. Click OK and OK, and there's our table. Let's give it a title, top 5 categories in selected period, and we just need an underline for that. I'm going to use a shape just a line shape because I don't want the line to go all the way across. So if I put a border on the cell, it would go all the way across and touch the charts on either side. So I'm just holding down Shift while I draw in the shape, and then let's change it to this thicker one here. We could probably nudge it across a little bit more. So there we have all of our charts and our top 5 categories table. We're ready to insert the slicers, which allow the user to interact and filter for different categories and months. So on the Analysis tab, I'm just going to select this pivot table here, which is the Treemap pivot table. It doesn't matter really which one you choose, as long as it's one that you want to filter with the slicer. And then on the pivot table Analyze tab, I'm going to insert slicer, and here I want category and date. So I want 2 slicers. Holding down Shift to select them both, I'm going to format them purple, and let's give the date slicer, go into the slicer formatting, we'll give it 2 columns, and we need to do some more formatting in the settings. So right click, slicer settings at the very bottom, and here I want the header to say month or MTH, and I want to hide items with no data. That's going to hide these 4 down here that are paler purple. Click OK. Those buttons will only come back if we have data for them. This one we need to do some similar changes, so go into the slicer settings. Here I want to hide items with no data. That'll hide the salary item. Okay, let's select them both, holding down Shift, Control X to cut them out. We'll paste them in the dashboard. So this one's going to go on this side, can be a bit narrower, maybe not that narrow. And this one's going to go on this side, and we'll make it fit in the space. Alright, so I'll just select them both and then we'll do some alignment. So we'll align them to the top, we'll move them up, and then let's make the buttons a bit bigger so they take up all the space. Okay, so there's our slicers. At the moment, they're only connected to the Treemap chart. So what I want to do is connect them to the other charts they need to be connected to. So I'm going to right click on the slicer, I'm going to Report Connections. And this is when naming the pivot tables becomes really important, because now I know which pivot table I want to connect to. So this one for category, I want to connect it to the expense column chart, and you can see up there I've missed one of the pivot tables, probably the last one I built, and also the Treemap, which it is. So click OK. Let's go in and fix the name of this pivot table. There it is, PT Top 5. And we'll go back and we'll finish with the month slicer connections. Right click, Report Connections. This one's going to be connected to my top 5, Treemap and the Waterfall. So now when I select different periods, you can see the top 5 categories, the Waterfall and the Treemap update accordingly. And likewise, when I select different categories, the Treemap and this total expenses over here updates accordingly. Now that we've got the slicers set up, I'd like to create custom chart labels that include information about what's selected. And if we go back to the original dashboard, you can see as I select items in the slicer, the label up here, here and here update to reflect what I'm selecting. So let's go and set those up. We'll go to the analysis sheet. Now the first thing I need is a pivot table that displays the items selected in the category slicer. So let's insert a new pivot table, insert pivot table onto our analysis sheet up here. And this is just going to contain the categories. I don't need the grand total, and let's add a filter in for the category type. So I only want the expense categories. All right, so this is my slicer pivot table. Let's name it PT Slicer. And we can now connect it to the category slicer in the Report Connections. We'll check the box for PT Slicer. So now if I select only 3 categories, we can see only 3 are selected here. So this pivot table now tells me what I've selected in this slicer. We can reference that with formulas to build dynamic labels. We need 3 separate labels. We'll start with the label for the expense column chart. So this is going to use the ifs function. If you don't have ifs, you can use a nested if formula. Works in the same way. So first I want to check that this cell here is not blank. This is the last category in my list. So if this cell's not blank, it means that all categories in the slicer are selected. So if it's not blank, then I want to return the text all expenses. However, if it is blank, then I need the next result returned. So we simply enter true here. And then what I want to return is a list of all of the categories selected, and I can use the text join function to do that. Now I should point out that the text join function is available in Excel 2019 onwards, so if you don't have that, you can't create this dynamic label in the same way. So the first argument is the delimiter. Well, I just want a comma and a space between each piece of text. I want to ignore empty cells, so we'll tab to select true, and then the text is just the text in these cells here. Close parentheses, press enter. So currently I have all expenses selected. If we go and select just 3, you can see it now lists them. So I want to link this cell to my chart title. So selecting the chart title in the formula bar equals, and then in the analysis sheet I simply want this cell here. And now we have a dynamic chart label that updates as I select different items in my slicer. Okay, the next label I want is my waterfall chart. Now it is only filtered by the month slicer, so I only need a title that reflects what month is selected, or months. So let's go and build that. We can grab that information from this cell here. So in this cell here I'll write my dynamic label. I want to start with the text expense by category, and I want to concatenate to that text some text that depends on what's selected in the slicer. So we're going to use ifs again. If you don't have ifs, you can use nested if. So if this cell here contains the text all, then I want it to return the text year to date. However, if this cell here contains the text multiple items, as it now does, then I want it to return the text multiple periods. However, if it contains a specific month, then I want it to simply return the value in this cell here. So my last logical test is true, close parentheses, and now we have expense by category, multiple periods, so we can link it to this chart. Now, the waterfall and the Treemap charts will not allow you to link the chart title to a cell. If I select the chart title, you can see, well, you probably can't see because I simply cannot click in the formula bar. So what we need to do is insert text box over the top of the chart title, and I'm going to just make it the width of the chart, and then in the formula bar equals, and we'll reference the cell here. Now text boxes can't have a formula entered in them, they can only reference a cell that contains a formula. That's why we write our label in a cell and then reference that cell in the text box. So let's format the font in this chart title, give it a slightly dark grey colour, and we want to get rid of the outline on that text box, so no outline. Okay, so there's the title for the waterfall chart. We've got one more to do for the tree map, and it's actually a combination of chart titles. The tree map is filtered by both the category slicer and the month slicer. So it needs to contain this text and what period is selected, which we used in the waterfall. So we'll start by saying include this information, and we'll add a hyphen and some spaces. And then I'm just going to leave that part there. I want to go and copy this, so and the ifs, which returns the period, and we'll just add it to this formula. So now we get, and you can't quite see it there, we get the categories selected and the period. If we just go and I'll grab this text box, paste it up here. Let's change the reference here from analysis 23 to this one. And now you can see it's picking up the category names and the period that's selected. Let's format the font in this shade of grey. Now when we select items in both slices, you can see all of the labels are updating accordingly. Okay, so we've built our dashboard and it's interactive. The next best thing to be able to do is update it really easily. So on the November data sheet, I've got my November data. I've already classified it into its categories, so it's ready to go. Obviously, you're going to download your data from your bank and then go ahead and classify it. But for now, just to demonstrate, I'm going to copy this data And then at the very bottom of the transactions table, on the very next row, I'm going to just Control V to paste it in. You'll see this blue marker here in the bottom right of the table will extend the table range down to include my new data. So there's my new bottom of the table. And that means all of the pivot tables here in my analysis sheet that are linked to that table will automatically pick up that new data. So if we go to the dashboard and you keep an eye on these charts here which have the month listed, on the Data tab I can simply click Refresh All. So one button and my dashboard is now updated to include my November data. I haven't had to do any more work. Now, one thing I have just noticed that I forgot to do is set the fields for the waterfall chart to show items with no data. We can see here with the chart filtered to show only June's data that there's no item for medical expenses. So the next column has now moved across to the left and it's not displaying as a total column. So let's go and fix that. On the Analysis tab, all we need to do is select a category field, right click, go into Field Settings, and then on the Layout and Print tab we want to check the box Show Items with No Data. Click OK. You can see now we have the medical item even though it's empty, and the net value is now in cell S35. We go back to the dashboard, you can see our net column is now correctly displaying. And if I select, for example, November's data, which also doesn't have any medical expenses, it's correct. If I clear all the filters, we can now see some medical expenses. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found some techniques and ideas you can use to build your own dashboards. You can download the file for this lesson containing the data and complete a dashboard from the link here. If you like this video, please give it the thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more. And why not share it with your friends who might also find it useful. Thanks for watching.